Welcome to First Congregational Church's online service. My name is Tom, pastor of said church, and I'd like to wish you a happy new year. Okay, now if you're cocking your head in confusion, wondering what planet I'm on, that's okay. I actually do understand that it's still November, but it is not December 31st yet. But today marks the beginning of Advent, which is the first Sunday of a new liturgical year. Year A, actually. So that means that ordinary time ended last week, closing out year C. And all those readings, and we begin year A whole new season of readings and holidays, and we're hanging out in the book of Matthew this year. And this is the beginning of what's called the Lord's time, because we're done with ordinary time and now we go into the Lord's time. And we all get to relive the life of Christ, starting with the season of anticipation for Christ's birth at Christmas, which is called Advent. Now, maybe you have your home decorated, or maybe you had it decorated since November 1st. Maybe you're still wondering, where you're going to find the time to hang the lights, and maybe you started decorating and you're just kind of in the process of it. But wherever you are in that space, you can feel the preparation of the holiday season approaching. You're thinking of gift ideas and parties with family and friends and colleagues, and possibly some of those holiday traditions that you always do. You're in preparation mode. Advent as a liturgical season is a journey towards Christ's arrival in anticipation of it. Yes, Christ already arrived, but we're still anticipating the arrival of Christ into areas of our life that feel Christ's absence. So perhaps you've experienced a shift or a change this past year that affects how you celebrate the holidays this year. Family dynamics changed, and now you're not sure how this new person or someone's absence fits in. Perhaps there was a job change that affects his finances and schedules dramatically. Maybe you're working through some new challenges that didn't exist last year, a new health challenge or uncertainty about the future. Either way, you're a different person altogether living in this world than you were from last journeys through Advent. And Advent teaches us how to posture ourselves for this new season, for this year, and where we find ourselves. Now, the arrival of Christ into our lives and situations probably won't look like a full resolution of all these circumstances, like at the end of a TV sitcom where everything is finally just set back right. But the arrival of Christ may merely bring a new way of approaching our difficulties, perhaps a new perspective that helps us make a bit of sense of something confusing, or even rest from the monotony of busyness. Advent is a journey with 5 stops along the way. 4 are on a Sunday, and the last stop is Christmas Eve. And each of these stops centers around a central theme, and those are hope, joy, love, peace, and redemption. The presence or acknowledgement of these gifts from God help us to see things just differently enough to help us traverse through them. So Christ's arrival into our life is not necessarily the alleviation of all difficulty, but small doses of strength to help us traverse through it all. And today we start with hope, and a really weird passage that sparked a whole fear-based end times theology where Christ returns to snatch his followers away and leave the wicked to endure a dystopian world of persecution. Yep, but don't mean that, don't worry. This passage was not meant to be interpreted that way. It's meant to spark hope. So let's dive in and see what we find. It'll be fun. Now, a large part of the Christmas season seems to be watching our favorite holiday movies, whether it's binging through Hallmark movies, cult classics like A Christmas Story, traditional favorites like White Christmas, claymation nostalgia like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, or new ones that have become classics like Elf. It's a holiday standard to take in our favorite movies, but there is a large group of folks out there that consider Die Hard with Bruce Willis a Christmas movie. There's even a Christmas sweater you can buy that shows the main bad guy in the closing falling scene, his name's Hans Gruber, falling off of the tower, and the sweater says it's not Christmas until Hans Gruber falls from Nakatomi Plaza. Well, that group of people is gonna like today's scripture passage because it's not about shepherds, angels, Mary, Joseph, or wise men. It's about Judgment Day. Yep, not Terminator 2 Judgment Day. It's like Merry Christmas Hans Gruber Judgment Day. Now our passage from Matthew 24 opens up saying, "For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. So too will it be for the coming of the Son of Man." Now, my earlier faith interpreted this passage saying that at the end of everything, Christ will snatch away those who faithfully followed him and leave behind those who did not pray the magic Jesus prayer to suffer the great tribulation. There were a ton of popular movies and books and novels around this concept that scared the crap out of my 9-year-old self. But how we interpret this passage is very different from how they interpreted this passage. So I think it's worthwhile to understand a little bit of their view. This passage is steeped in the story of Noah, who dodged the great flood judgment by building an ark. It's a really old story, like 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, and it doesn't make sense to our modern ears, and that's okay. But we can understand how they understood it because it shaped their perspectives on things. They lived in a society very close to the earth, farming for their food, both crops and livestock. And they saw death and rebirth process up close all the time. And they actually based their entire lives on it. Seeds die, are buried, and then they grow anew. Goats give birth, and then they die and are consumed for food, right? The flood story is a great dying and a great rebirth of the whole earth. Now we tend to focus on the death part, while many of the prophets focused on the rebirth part. Now, seasons were important to them. So this is not the end of the world, but a world. And more importantly, the birth of another. Advent reminds us that ends are also beginnings. We end the liturgical year to start a new one with Advent. The arrival of Christ always means the end of something to make room for it. Old perspectives that got you here but won't take you further, they die off as irrelevant to make room for new perspectives. Old practices that no longer help you, they die off to make room for new practices. And this is hope. That in the midst of endings of life, no matter how catastrophic, there are always new beginnings. Now, hope does not divert us around these endings or even soften the blow of them. Hope instead acts as a life preserver, taking us through the floodwaters. So if this passage has always filled you with fear, I am sorry for that. It should fill you with hope that something new is around the corner. Did you know that to plug in a USB cable correctly the first time is one of the most difficult tasks known to humans today? Now think about it. When was the last time you just nailed it on the first try? I don't think I ever have. Usually the process goes like this. Attempt number 1, oh, no, it doesn't fit that way. Flip it over. Attempt number 2, nope, doesn't go that way either. Flip it back to first position. Attempt number 3, oh, yep, there it is. And it does not fail. I get it backwards every single time. Every time. The first attempt is always the right way, but never plugs in until you do it the wrong way and then go back to the right way again. Why? I have no idea. I don't get to break the rules of the universe. I'm just noticing them. Now, this next passage is one that we get backwards too. Christ is talking about the coming judgment day arriving suddenly, like the flood in the days of Noah. Then this next verse is an illustration of what that looks like. He says there will be 2 in the field. One will be taken and one will be left. 2 women will be grinding meal together. One will be taken and one will be left. So the teenage version of me believed that I really had to watch my behavior or else God would be mad at me. And if God was mad at me right at the time that God returned, I was screwed because I would be left behind. And this was based on a modern interpretation of this passage. Now, the popular folk theology around this verse says that some righteous folks will be raptured away into heaven, and those left on earth will endure great suffering of the great tribulation under the dictator rule of the Antichrist. But we got it backwards. Remember that the story of Noah is the context. Who was taken away and who was left behind? The quote-unquote wicked were washed away in the floodwaters, while Noah and his family were left behind on earth to rebuild a new creation. See? We got it backwards. Now, Matthew is written to a Hebrew audience who practiced the sacrificial temple system for thousands of years. The culture and tradition of an entire people for generations rotate around this building and what happens in it. Now we must remind ourselves that this is not the end of the world, but the end of a world, probably the world that rotated around the temple worship system that was in place for thousands of years. Rome will crush it all, bringing that whole world to a close. But these new communities, based on the teachings of Christ, will carry the torch into a new creation. They gather, not around a temple system with elaborate sacrifices, but a table with a meal open to all. Not demanding all conform into one culture, but adjusting itself to fit into the culture in which it is planted. The hope of Advent is that with the end of old things, new and beautiful things can grow. It doesn't mean that the endings are painless or enjoyable. It means that they can be endurable, because life has a way of not only enduring, but being beautiful. We know that light returns, and the days get longer, and trees get green again, and warmth returns. So we celebrate Advent during the darkest seasons of the year by hanging lights on our houses and lighting candles inside of them in beautiful protest to the dark. So may it be so in life as well. Find the beautiful things to protest the encroaching darkness. Okay, there's a clinical diagnosis called hypervigilance. It is defined as, quote, state of increased alertness that leads to extreme sensitivity to your surroundings. So in this state, your nervous system goes into seek out all the dangers mode. This state is helpful when you are in certain situations, but certain circumstances will put your body into this state permanently. A common one is called post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of recovering fundamentalists have this disorder from years of vigilance of their own behavior, fearing that God will smite them at the next misstep. So when our final section says, keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would have not left his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Okay, you can see how this can lead to fearful hyperdiligence. I actually remember a pastor using this verse as a warning to me in my teenage years in a sermon. And he said, don't do anything you wouldn't want to be doing when Christ returns, and don't go anywhere you wouldn't want to be found when Christ returns. Why? Because you could be left behind to endure the great tribulation. No pressure, really. So if y'all ever wonder why post-evangelical culture needs therapy, I submit this story as evidence. Leave it to toxic religion, though, to take something beautiful and transform it into something psychologically harmful. Now, it doesn't mean this. We're all waiting for Christ to arrive in our lives to set something right. Maybe you're waiting on a situation to change, a resource to come, an opportunity to pop up. Now, to stay awake in this passage is not to notice all the dangers and potential missteps you could do that make God angry with you. Instead, it's a vigilance based on hope and not fear. We really don't know when Christ arrives in our lives to make something right. And often it arrives in smaller doses that are so undramatic that we miss it. We are shaped a little each day by these small arrivals that prepare us for a big one. So stay awake and notice a smile from a friend, the beauty of decorations as you drive, the way the light reflects off snow like gems in the morning. It might not be the large arrival that you desire, but it eases the burden of today just a little. So we light candles at Christmas. And we light the candle of hope on the first Sunday of Advent, not because everything is turning out like a Hallmark movie in our life, but because things are not yet turning out like a Hallmark movie in our life. We know that things are not as they should be, and we need to tend the light in the midst of the darkness. This is how we practice being a people of hope, by repeating this act every year in this manner. Advent keeps us rooted and anchored in the practice of hope in the midst of kingdoms coming and going, rising and falling. Advent teaches us to place our hope in something deeper than the rising and falling kingdoms or coming and going pleasures of our day. We are to place them in the things that seem to endure throughout time, the traits that let the image of God shine through us in the midst of turbulence. And Advent celebrates 5 of them: hope, joy, love, peace, and redemption. I hope you join us for the journey, and I hope that you find the goodness of God here amongst you today. Thanks for joining us today. Hey, thanks for hanging out in the cold, snowy day with me here today. And I hope you found a little bit of hope, help, and healing along the way. If you enjoyed what you saw here, you connect with the teaching, the spirit of the teaching, and you want to partner with us, you can like our Facebook page. I said it. You can follow us on Facebook or Instagram and subscribe on YouTube. That's where we hang out these days. Maybe we'll expand one day. I don't know, possibly. But that's where we're at right now. You can do that. And down on the bottom of your screen, there is a way for you to give financially. If you are in a position to do so, we are in a position to receive your help. And you can type that little that little linky thing up in your little searchy bar up there, and it'll take you to a page where you can do a one-time or a recurring gift. And I hope you enjoyed the first Sunday of Advent. We got 3 more and Christmas Eve that'll be coming up here. So peace out, and we'll see you next week for candle number 2, Advent number 2. Gotta hurry, battery's almost dead. Is it going? Okay.